Proverbs 5, we're going to be looking at the first 14 verses. I'm going to read them before we jump into it. I'm going to read them as all together, and then we'll work our way through it. We come now to another really cycle of he has in chapter 2 has told us that wisdom protects from the foolish woman, from the seduction of the strange woman. And so now in Proverbs chapter 5, he begins to drill down more deeply with this and to give more specific warning. This is, in the first 9 chapters, this is a major subject that comes up again and again and again, the seduction of, in Proverbs chapter 5, it's the adulteress. And as we're thinking about it, we see Proverbs talking about the strange woman, or the immoral woman, and also the adulteress. And we recognize that technically there's a difference. The adulteress is an immoral woman who is married, and the immoral woman is not married. And so there is some distinction in the way that we use the terms and the way we would think about it. I don't think that Proverbs is actually intending, for the most part, there's one major exception, but for the most part, I don't think Proverbs is intending to draw a hard line and saying that, this is what an adulteress is and this is what an immoral woman is, and trying to draw the big distinction. I think there's a lot of overlap and just simply describing in the broadest sense what immorality looks like, or what the inducement to immorality looks like. And I trust we recognize in the continued need for this kind of warning. We live in a pornographied age, so that immorality of all sorts drives our cultural thinking about a wide range of things. LGBT. I say 4 letters and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Even if you're not up on a whole lot of other stuff that may be related to it, it is such a major part of our lives and our culture that we discuss people's identity, we discuss businesses in terms of their relation to sexual immorality. And that's what, I know it's way off the track from Proverbs 5, but when we talk about LGBT movement and those kinds of things, we are talking about sexual immorality. And so we have to lump all of this whole cultural notion that sex is identity into this understanding of immorality. And so Proverbs 5 focuses on the adulteress. Now, we're thinking about who Proverbs is written to. Why would the emphasis be on the adulteress as opposed to just a generic immoral person? Who is Proverbs written to? My son. So Solomon writing to his son, the impression is that he is a young man. And so Solomon, in writing Proverbs, is making it very deeply personal. And he is giving his son specific instruction that he needs. Solomon's not being generic here. He's being very specific, very precise, very personal. But as we've seen already in going and talking about Proverbs, we take the specific and we recognize that these are illustrations of principles. So in this case, absolutely, the specific principles apply to very specific situations, but there also is general principles that we must take away from this. And so I've entitled it, Avoid the Adulteress, but we really can say avoid all immorality. It applies to everything that is outside the bounds of what is biblical sexual behavior, what is Christian right, God-designed sexual behavior. And so as I'm being specific, as we're working through the text and being specific with it, I do want you to have in your mind that we can't limit it to the specific instance or to the specific direct statements. We have to understand this to be general principles that are being applied to a specific situation. So we need to be looking for those general principles that are at work here. So Proverbs chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion and your lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell. Lest you ponder her path of life, her ways are unstable. You do not know them. Therefore hear me now, my children, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the cruel one. Lest aliens be filled with your wealth, and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you mourn at last. When your flesh and your body are consumed, and say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart despised correction. I have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to those who instructed me. I was on the verge of total ruin, in the midst of the assembly and the congregation." So we have a very stern, direct warning here. And this father's opening plea, it starts off in reminding the son. He says, pay attention to my wisdom and lend your ear to my understanding. He's reminding the son of what he needs to escape the seduction of the immoral woman. What does he need to avoid this immorality? He needs wisdom and understanding. And that wisdom and understanding will enable him to preserve discretion and knowledge. These are four of the major words for wisdom that are used in the book of Proverbs. These are these essential things that Proverbs is bent on teaching. Solomon says, keep these. Pay attention to wisdom and understanding. Those are the two synonymous words together. You see wisdom or understanding in Proverbs, it means almost always basically the same thing. So he's using them together there. And he says, pay attention to them so that you will preserve and keep. So these things will not be lost, that you will not let go of them, not let them slip. But pay attention. And I stress that in part because there's someone, in fact, I read a commentator just this last week that said this first two verses are just a generic opening statement. They don't really mean anything and don't really apply to the rest of what's about to come. And this guy's actually a very smart man. His commentary has some really good stuff in it. But he really missed the boat on that. Because it's absolutely the function of wisdom is to protect from the immoral woman. And so, in fact, Proverbs chapter 2, if you remember, he says in verse 10, when wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you. Those are the same four words in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Wisdom, understanding, discretion, and knowledge. They will do this to deliver you from the way of evil men and to deliver you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. So before we even get into the details of the rest of this exhortation, what Proverbs teaches is that biblical wisdom protects from immorality, protects from all immoral behavior. If wisdom and understanding are truly there, it will not pursue that which is immoral. And so he goes on then and begins to describe the adulteress. And I start with this, even though it's really the conclusion. The kiss of the adulteress is the kiss of death. This is the persistent claim of Proverbs, is that immorality ends in death. This is destructive to life. It's destructive to well-being. It's destructive to the person. Paul said in Corinthians, he who commits fornication sins against his own flesh. It is a self-destructive behavior. And then he goes on, though, and he begins to describe for us in verse 3 and 4 what she's like. She is a smooth talker. Verse 3. Her lips drip honey. Her mouth is smoother than oil. She says all the right things at exactly the right time. She speaks in a way that captures your attention. The adulteress captivates with her words, and everything she says sounds marvelous. That's what he's saying. Again, Kenneth Aiken said she speaks delicious words full of delectable promise. I can't help, I know I'm getting way ahead here, but I can't help but think back to Satan. Because I see in it's Proverbs, in Solomon's description of her words, I hear the hiss of the serpent in it. All of this promise of how good this is, and yet it ends in death. That's what the adulteress offers. And the fool here, as we think about where her life goes, and that's all Solomon says about her. Just by the way, he's going to describe her more fully later. All he says about her charms is how marvelous her words are. She speaks well and wonderfully. Her words are an invitation. Solomon says, here's where it leads. Here's her destination. And the fool imagines that the destination of the adulteress is a night of pleasure. But what Solomon says is the way of the adulteress is the way of death. And he now, verse 4, draws a contrast. Her mouth drips honey, but actually her words are poisonous. They are not sweet. They're not words of health. Honey was typically used and seen as a healthy thing, as that which delights the eyes, refreshes the soul. And that's what she promises, that delight and refreshing, this sweetness that's good. And what it is poison. It's bitter as wormwood. It is this deadly poison. It's not smooth. It is sharp. It is cutting. Again, the oil, especially if we're talking about olive oil, it was used as a healing agent. It was used to disinfect and to speed healing. A sword is not a healing agent. A sharp, deadly sword is destructive. And that's what her words actually are. They sound great, but they're venomous. And he says her way is death. Verse 5, her feet go down to death. The adulteress simply is traveling on the road to death. And those who succumb to her deceit join her on that path. And ultimately her destination is hell. Her steps lay hold of hell. It leads you straight into the grave and into judgment. So that the pleasure that she offers never matches what's actually promised. And the consequences are far worse than the delights that she may actually give, or the delights that she promises. And so she is one here that is plunging to her ruin. She is at this point is bent headlong on her own destruction, and she is doing all she can to take all of her victims with her, to lay hold of as many as possible and drag them to death and hell with her. And her lifestyle, verse 6, is unstable and uncertain or unknowable. He says, back up to verses 1 and 2, he says, "My son, pay attention that you may preserve and keep. And now verse 6, he's giving some of the other consequences, some of the other side of this. Pay attention, preserve and keep, not just that you will be, but lest you. Pay attention to wisdom, lest you ponder her path of life. And I think what he is saying in pondering it is to consider following it, lest you consider the offerings that she's offering to you, lest you consider her way. He says, don't do that. Don't consider joining her. Don't consider her invitation, because she is unstable. And her path is ultimately unknowable. You won't know where she's going, especially when you fall for her lies. You're blinded to the consequences. But there's a sense of this, and just her wickedness it leads to an instability in her own life. So there's actually, you don't know what she's going to do. This is an unstable woman in every sense of the term, because of her path that she is on. And so he says, don't consider it, but instead turn away and stay away. He says, verse 8, remove your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house. Get as far away as possible. Flee youthful lust. That's what Solomon is saying. What did Joseph do when Potiphar's wife came in and grabbed hold of him and sought to seduce him? He ran. He ran. There is absolutely, when we're talking about these kinds of temptations, the right biblical response is run away. Run away. You are not brave. You're not strong. You're not capable. You're not able. Run. Beat a hasty retreat as rapidly as possible. Go. That's what he's saying. Stay away. It's not worth it. Because verse 9 and following, he now begins to tell us the danger. He says your reputation will be ruined, lest you give your honor to others. Your honor is now taken away. That's what he's talking about. Your honor is taken away. In this culture, and even in America, I know sometimes as messed up as American culture is in regards to sexuality, there's still an aspect here very much of literally when someone commits adultery, their reputation is ruined. They are known now as that. And it's still, even though we talk about the sexual freedom that we may have in our nation, there's still a recognition that this is not right. And the one who does it, their reputation is lost, as their honor is taken away from them. And in fact, your life is ruined. He says you give your years to the cruel one. Following this path is following a path to your own ruin. And he says, verse 10, lest aliens be filled with your wealth, and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. Part of what he's saying here is that your wealth will go to another. Your work, all that you labor for, will go to fill another's house. You will lose and another will increase. And some of this ties into Israel and its culture there, that the adulterer would have a price exacted of him by the offended husband. And so that the one who committed adultery, he may actually have to pay significant penalties if he didn't die. If you remember, the Mosaic Law commanded the death penalty, but it seems that often was not actually followed through on. And so if he didn't die, he may be working to pay off another. But if not that directly, certainly there's aspect of, as sometimes happens in adulterous relationships, the husband is giving all of these things to his paramour, the one he's having that immoral relationship with. And he's buying her jewelry and other such things and giving his wealth instead of into his own house where it should be. It's going into the house of another. It is a self-destructive path and habit here. In the end, he says, you will come to grief. When you mourn at last, when your flesh and body are consumed. So not only do you come to grief, your body is ruined. We know this from sexual sin very definitely has built-in physical consequences. Long before the AIDS scare, there were physical consequences to immorality. And I think that's part of what Solomon is pointing to. The fact that immoral relationships have a built-in judgment, that there is a much higher chance that you're going to contract some disease that is going to be destructive to your flesh. And he says, don't do it. It's going to bring you great sorrow and again, ruin. And then he says, verse 12, 13, you will have deep, deep regret. And you will say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart despised correction, and not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined mine ear to those who instructed me. Here is, some of these we might say, especially as we look at it today, we might say, well, those may be escapable. You know, we have medications for certain diseases. You know, our culture is a little bit more loose on certain things. It's not going to be, it's bent out of shape if you had an affair. Maybe people forget it and overlook it. But I think this one is generally inescapable. The deep regret, the sorrow of a life that's wasted, the sorrow of the time that could have been spent with wife and kids, the sorrow of money spent and blown, to switch the analogy, the sorrow of money spent every month on subscribing to some filthy website, and the regret of all of that wasted money because of pursuing this immorality. You'll have deep regret. And ultimately, you'll come to total ruin. You will say, I was on the verge of total ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. I know he says here it's on the verge, but as we already saw, her path leads to death and hell. What is waiting is ruin. Total destruction. I don't want to imply that this is unforgivable by any means, but there are deep and abiding consequences of immoral behavior. And so, part of what we do with this is we recognize, even though we've been talking about one specific scenario, a man having an affair with a married woman, even though that really it's not a good euphemism. Having an affair, it's so much worse than the lightheartedness of that word. Engaging in a deeply immoral, destructive relationship with a married woman. And that's what he's talking about. But this, in the broad sense, absolutely applies in our culture across a wide spectrum of sexual invitations. It applies on the internet. The invitations are there, promising all kinds of things, promising the satisfaction of whatever desire you might have. We see these invitations on the covers of books. And so not just the explicit imagery of pictures, but the explicit imagery of words. And the invitations there of a deeply satisfying relationship with Mr. Whatever. And promising still, really, a mouth, a cover dripping honey with lips smoother than oil. And it's still the same kind of destruction, or same kind of seduction that leads to destruction. So part of, even before we get to the application, part of what we do with this, we take warning ourselves. We remember the dangers of this. But we also remember to warn others. Solomon here is, of course, he's warning his son. There's opportunities in our lives as we are interacting with the younger generation, especially family members, grandchildren, or nieces and nephews, to warn. This is dangerous. This is not just something, it's something maybe everybody does. And unfortunately, in our culture, the younger generation, the number is astronomical. It's 90-something%, I think it is, of teenagers have seen explicit material online. So really, the reality is almost every teenager you've met has seen pornographic imagery. And the great majority have experimented with it to some extent or other. We live in a culture that needs the warning that this is not a safe pastime. This is destructive. It destroys lives and relationships. They may say, well, it's not like drugs. You see somebody that, their brain is fried because of the drugs they've been on. And immorality doesn't have that same kind of very evident physical destruction. That does not mean it is not destroying souls. It does not mean it's not destroying lives. It's not destroying the way that we view people. And I think it's one of the biggest dangers of the whole sexual industry, from advertising to books to the internet and all the pornographic content on it, from what we might look at and barely think of think, well, okay, it's not really good, it's not modest, it's not pornographic. From that, I'll say mild, end of the spectrum, all the way across, what it does is it teaches us to view people as commodities, as products to be used. And that's it, to be, whatever I want to get out of it, and that's it. They're just a thing. People aren't things. People are image bearers of God. All of them. Whether they're on the commercial or on the computer, they're image bearers of God. And we need to warn others the danger, extreme danger of this. Part of what we do with this as well, and part of what Solomon is doing with this, so he's two things going on, simultaneous tracks. He is warning of the physical, real danger of adultery and immorality in general. He's also showing the great danger of folly. Because here he is using sexual promiscuity as an analogy, a metaphor, if you will, for unfaithfulness to wisdom. He is, and we're going to see it especially in chapter 9, but we have to recognize that this is a word picture, this is a parable of sorts, to show us the danger of folly, of following it. And so Proverbs chapter 3, let me give you a few things. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 13 says, the man who finds wisdom will be happy, but the one who holds the adulteress will be ruined. There's a contrast. He has already laid the groundwork for it. Now he's bringing in the other side of it. The one who finds wisdom finds happiness. The one who finds adultery, immorality, that promises happiness, he finds ruin. The way of wisdom is pleasant, Proverbs 3:17 tells us. It really is. It's not easy, but it's pleasant. There are delights to it that are substantial and worthwhile. The way of the adulteress is bitter. It is destructive, deadly, poisonous, bitter. The proceeds of wisdom are better than material profit. Proverbs 3, verses 14 and 15 tell us. What wisdom gives to us and what the proceeds we get from wisdom are better than gold and silver and jewels and rubies. The pleasures of the adulteress are worse than material loss. You see the contrast? What we've seen already in Proverbs chapter 5 is not just that you will lose materially, but you will lose far more than that. You will lose that which can never be purchased. So the pleasures promised by the adulteress are actually worse than material loss. Wisdom brings life. The adulteress brings death. Just that simple. You have a choice again and again and again, the way of life and the way of death. Solomon says, look at the consequences. Look where that road goes. Because your choice is going to set you on a path to a consequence. Wisdom brings delight. The adulteress brings regret. How's that for turning the world on its head? This temptation comes to us so often, and it says, well, God doesn't want you to have this good thing. God is withholding something that you would enjoy and would be really beneficial if you would just go and take it. Don't worry about what God said. He's trying to keep you from what's fun, what's good, what's right, what's happy. And what Solomon says, and what Scripture clearly teaches, is that it is actually wisdom that brings true delight. So we go to Matthew chapter 5, and we discover blessed are the poor in spirit. You ask anybody in the culture at large to tell us what a happy man looks like, give us a description of his character. I am confident you're not going to meet one person in a million who says, oh yeah, a happy man's going to be poor in spirit. Not at all. They're going to say that, no, if he's poor in spirit, I don't even really know what that means, but he can't be happy. They're just poor. He's not happy. Scripture gives a completely different perspective of what's happiness, of what true delight and joy is. It's wisdom. It's found through wisdom. It's found in wisdom. The adulteress comes along and says, here's happiness. Here's pleasure for you. Take it and you will have great pleasure. And what Scripture says is you will have regret. Deep, abiding, soul-destroying regret. Dr. Charles McLean said the allure of infidelity does not ever match the reality of infidelity. Just what it promises is never what it gives. And again, we're talking about adultery or any other form of immorality. It never what it actually says it's going to be. So what do we do with this? And I'm going to make this very broad in some of these applications. First and foremost, count the cost of sin. That's what Solomon is teaching us to do here. It's what he's teaching his son to do, is look at what's there. Look at what's offered. Is it worth it? And the fool says, oh yeah, because the fool, he doesn't think about wisdom. He doesn't think about consequences. All he thinks about is the immediate. The wise man looks and says, looks beyond the immediate, looks beyond the surface. And says, now where does this go? What path does this put me on? Is it worth it? And so we look, and again, not just immorality, though that absolutely is worth looking at. You look and think, is this really worth it? Should I buy this magazine? Should I buy this book? Should I go to this place? Is it worth it? Well, no. Go back to Proverbs 5 again. No, it's not. Well, yeah, and we remember with that, sin's price is far greater than advertised. It always is. There's an old Southern gospel song that I think says it well. Sin will cost you far more than you want to pay, and will keep you longer than you wanted to stay. Sin's price is always greater. It's never going to come as cheaply as it seems. And with that, the pleasure of sin is never worth the cost. And if we go back to the surface for a second, the advertised price, the pleasure of sin is not worth that, much less the hidden cost of sin. We have to also reject the live for today mantra of today. We still have this. I don't know if anybody says it anymore, but they not too long ago would talk about YOLO, YOLO. You only live once. That's the mantra of the world, is I'm going to do what I want to do. It's my life. I'm going to live it however I want to live. I'm going to get what I can while I can get it. This whole seduction of the adulteress is right now is the time to get your pleasure. Take what you can get while you can get it. And part of the way that we deal with all of these temptations is to completely reject this idea of you is living for today, that my life is all about what I can get right now. Wisdom is saying, look at the end. Not just the right now. Look at the end. Look at the reward and the judgment. We have to utterly reject the live for the day mantra. Very specifically, adultery is not worth the cost. And I think part of what Solomon's pointing at here is even if you're never found out, it's still not worth it. Even if nothing ever gets made known, everything it goes as well as it could, it's not worth it. Listen to the wisdom of godly teachers. Not the words of the seductress, not the word of the temptress, not the word of the tempter. Listen to the wisdom of godly teachers. That's where it starts. It's paying attention to wisdom, hearing, understanding. As well, look behind the curtain. You've seen Wizard of Oz, I imagine. You have a guy hiding behind the green curtain, pulling levers, blowing smoke, magnifying his voice, making it seem like there's something bigger and better when there's nothing there. Nothing of real substance, nothing that's near what is offered or portrayed. Part of what Proverbs 5 teaches, again, all the Proverbs, is look behind the surface. Look behind the glossy advertising. Look behind the photoshopping and the airbrushing. Look behind the lurid words and the vivid depictions. Look behind the makeup and the smile and the eyes and the lips. Look behind to see the reality. So it's going back to some of what we've already said of just counting the cost, but you're now looking to see what's actually there. Maybe you'd say, who is actually there? What kind of person is this that I'm talking to or being portrayed to me? Look behind to see the reality. Run away. I mean, really, that is simple. Run away. As fast as you can. When temptation is there, run away. One commentator said the seductress is a very persuasive and very dangerous woman. The only safe course of action is to keep well away from her. And again, I'd draw that out more broadly, just simply to temptation. Temptation is often incredibly seductive, and it is always incredibly dangerous. The best course of action whenever you can is to keep away from it. Don't get in the spot where you be tempted. Just stay away. Charles Bridges said, never is the beginning so sweet as the end is bitter.